Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. This is Cody Eaton with JBS International, and thank you for joining today's Ask a Grantee Expert office hour session featuring the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Before we begin, we'd like to review a couple of housekeeping items. Today's presentation is intended to be an interactive discussion between the presenters and the participants. However, we please ask that participants keep themselves on mute unless requested to unmute and use the raise hand feature in Zoom to indicate that you have a question. We also encourage you to turn on your video, especially when asking a question to the presenters. In addition, please feel free to use the chat feature to interact with the presenters and ask questions as well. Open your chat window by clicking on the chat icon located at the bottom center of your toolbar window. Near the end of the session, we will request that anyone who wants to receive additional information and resources related to the session send their email in the chat, and we will add you to this office hour sessions listserv. There will be a link to a post-event survey sent in the chat at the end of the presentation as well, and it will also be emailed to all registered participants in the coming days. We would greatly appreciate it if you filled this out, as it will support future development efforts. If you experience any technical issues during the session, please message us using the chat feature or email us at obc-tta@jbsinternational.com. Today's office hour session is being recorded for sharing. The recording and presentation slides, along with other resources, will be made available to the OBC-TTA listserv in the coming weeks. All right, now I'd like to turn things over to our experts for today. Stop sharing my screen. All right.
Thank you so much, Cody. And Jenny, are you going to say anything first, or?
I don't have to. My dog's going crazy in the background, so it might be better. Our lawn people are here, so. But other than thank you, Kay, for doing this. I'm really excited for your results.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you, and see Carlos is on, and Mary was also our technical assistance support person along the way. So we're at the end of our grant. And I just want a special thanks to JBS International. Along the way, I'll also kind of highlight some of the wonderful support and training we got that helped us with our grant. So we're in a no-cost extension, so we're really just kind of very appreciative of this opportunity to share. It really helps to see kind of the story of the grant. So. And my colleagues today are at a recovery center for women with young children doing one of the groups that I'll talk about along the way. So I'm just going to represent our work today. And so we were able to get a grant in 2019 that was focused on the impact of the opioid crisis on very young children and their families. And so that's what the focus is for us. At that time, Maryland was reported to be had the fifth highest rate of opioid use among pregnant women in the country. And as you all know, the increases in opioid use in pregnant women, greatly rose starting in 2010. Sorry. And the Center for Disease Control and SAMHSA and others were really both trying to get out the word about medication for opioid use disorder, but also strategies to reduce stigma and address the needs of the whole family as part of a more comprehensive recovery approach. So stigma and psychosocial barriers was something that we had focused on in the grant, and I'll be talking with you about that. And overcoming stigma, both perceived stigma, what others think about me, and self-stigma, shame, and self-doubt is a needed area of research for moms seeking services. And it is really thanks to our technical assistants that we included questions in a IRB approved survey that I'll tell you about. And that did definitely help us learn more. Also, we knew from previous work in Baltimore City about the high level of adverse childhood experiences, but our survey also that I'll go over talks about both ACEs and adult traumas that happen in adulthood in the lives of pregnant women and women with young children with opioid use disorder. And the co-occurrence of opioid use disorder plus ACEs and trauma really makes the needs around parenting more complex, and we believe a place for special attention, both to help with the intergenerational transmission of ACEs, but to also have that opportunity to identify the needs of young children early and to support their development. And also there is research that shows that this really is supportive of mom's recovery goals as well. And that's certainly something that we've learned from the moms. So our goals of our grant were to train professionals about the impact of childhood trauma and opioid use. And so we had the wonderful opportunity to train 280 professionals over the life of the grant. We got to talk a lot to people in the child welfare system, as well as early care and educators and other mental health and recovery professionals as well. We got to provide evidence-based services to families with children that are, under the age of 5. And so we were able to work with 58 moms and their children. And we conducted a community needs assessment to learn more about the needs and the impact of opioid use on families with young children. And then we tried to pull together what we had learned into a breakthrough series collaborative. We had 3 faculty members from the community, so people really centering and honoring people with lived experience as expert and faculty teachers for the learning community, and 3 teams participated. I also just want to note that we started on this journey at the very beginning of the pandemic, and so there were many hurdles to overcome. So I'm proud that we were able to really reach all of our goals. So the first thing we worked on was the needs assessment. And at first, we had plans to go out into the community, but it was COVID and things were locked down. So we were very fortunate to start relationships with recovery programs who, of course, were open. They had moms and their babies living there, getting treatment. And as long as we, followed their protocols and kept in touch, as you remember, the ups and downs of all the different things we had to do during that time, we were able to go into the programs to both administer the survey, but also to do actual interventions, parent programs that we had to offer. So it's a cross-sectional study, and we recruited moms that identified as having opioid use disorder, and so the majority of them were in recovery homes, and they had children under the age of 5. And so we worked on this for a little bit over a year, recruiting mostly in person at the recovery homes and a few virtual. The measurements were really survey items, some from standardized measures like depression and trauma, and some more questions that were trying to understand what the psychosocial needs of families were. And we did include the brief opioid stigma scale, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and a modified version of the ACE questionnaire. There we go. So on average, the women were 30, 31, 32 years old, and the majority did have more than one child. Some were living with them, some weren't. The majority were white and English speaking, and high school degree area. And you won't be surprised about what they identified as their most important family needs. Safe and stable housing was really the main thing that people talked about, and affordable childcare. So some of the moms did have childcare while they were in the recovery program, but were very concerned about what would happen next when they were to move to the next level of care or to return home. They also recognized the need to manage stress. So 50% said that was a big priority. And then close to 50% talked about basic needs as well, diapers and food and clothing and things like that. And as you might know, there really isn't any entitlements that allow payment for diapers. So whenever we would do the groups, and even when we would administer the surveys, we work with a diaper bank, and so we would bring in, supplies to try to support that issue. The women had very high levels, reported very high levels of polysubstance use, really over many years, and so you can see that they that opioid use wasn't the only substance, but they used several substances. In the opioid stigma scale that we were got some good advice from JBS International to include, we really learned about the high level of both perceived and self-stigma. And though that seems obvious, to folks that work in the field, what was surprising was that these were women that are in like the highest level of care. And so thinking about, we had thought a lot about, and with Carlos' help, engagement of women and got some very good training in motivational interviewing. But even with that, we were surprised to really think about what are the unmet needs around stigma. And when we started to dig into it more, really understanding that the women that we were talking to had all kinds of stigma related concerns prior to having an opioid use disorder. So for about 50% of them talked about dealing with pain in life, and there's some very good literature that talks about stigma related to pain, and that people often don't feel believed when they have pain concerns. And then we also in this population have moms that are reporting very high levels of adverse childhood experiences and traumatic events in adulthood. So those things are very linked to stigma, and also high levels of mental health needs. So it's not only related to addiction, it's probably many layers of stigma, and thinking together about how we can maybe add more stigma reduction education or programs or interventions into recovery beyond engagement and motivation is something that we learned a bit about. In regards to health, you can see that the women definitely have some health, their health, 65% had fair or poor health. So they also have physical health concerns that also include significant amount of concerns about pain and how to manage pain. So kind of layering things up, there's stigma, there's pain that's unresolved, there's also physical health concerns, that are challenging to resolve. And the moms also reported, using polysubstances really all day long. So starting with drug use in the morning. So moms with fair or poor health reported to kind of the first thing out of bed was, using opioid. So working with programs to address kind of that whole biopsychosocial all those biopsychosocial needs is really a priority. The moms reported significant mental health concerns, and because they were in treatment programs, they were all receiving some kind of mental health medication for the most part, and some therapies as well. But again, you can see some of the correlations between people that are reporting higher levels of mental health concerns and living with poor health conditions. The role of anxiety was something that also was really interesting, and you see almost 100, so 90% of the moms reported that during the past 4 weeks, the past month, they had symptoms of panic attacks, of shortness of breath, of sweating, of heart racing, of pounding, dizziness, fainting, tingling, numbness, nausea, and stomach aches. And they report pretty high levels, of concerns about anxiety and stress, and repeated situations where it really gets in the way of them being able to meet some of their goals. So a very comprehensive approach to mental health and substance use treatment, an integrated approach is, really is called for, through this data set. So then our other so wanting to know about the moms and their needs and their health was one aspect of the survey, but the other was also kind of a family level needs. And so in addition to those psychosocial needs that we talked about, those economic needs we talked about, we asked questions about family. And 83, so thinking of the generation before, 83% reported that their parents had problems with alcohol or drug use during the mother's childhood, and 72% of the moms understood that what happened to them in childhood, living with a parent with a substance use problem and other things that I'll get to in a minute, like child abuse or neglect, they understand that this affects them now as a parent. And I think one of the reasons that I want to, kind of put that forward is to really use the wisdom of the moms. So much of what gets in the way of a trauma-informed approach is people don't want to bring things up, or they don't think the folks that have experienced trauma are ready to talk about it or want to talk about it. But, in our experience with the moms, they were very ready to talk about it, really wanting to talk about it, and had a lot of insight how it was impacting them as a parent, both in positive and negative ways. Some would say, because it happened to me, I don't want it to happen to my kids. So they used it as a motivational goal. And some parents also talked about that, that when they were stressed, those memories and those difficulties really came up for them. So you see that the moms report high levels of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. So before they were 18, living with a parent with alcohol or drug use, parents that seen domestic violence, family separations, as well as experiencing parents' mental health, untreated mental health conditions, and including attempted suicide. So definitely exposed to a lot of violence. We did not put in child sexual abuse because in Maryland, if an adult reports that they were sexually abused as a child, we have to report it. We have to report that now. And we just thought that that would get in the way of the goals of the survey. So we can also imagine that those might be high as well. But in addition to what happened in childhood, we also asked about, as an adult, did you experience, what trauma exposures did you experience? And so domestic violence is the highest one, but also experiencing community violence as well. So, things that the moms told us were that they really want help in having things different for their children. So their hopes and their dreams for their children are big motivators for their recovery goals. And they also recognize that sometimes they project their own feelings onto their children. They wanted help with that. And they were worried about, for the children that they were separated from, that they were repeating the past, as they had, lost parents and had big family separations. So when asked if they would design a treatment program for moms in recovery, they talked about wanting a mother-baby program that offers parenting classes for new moms, a place where kids can live with you, learning to manage PTSD and how to cope with it, and have support for the parents and not exclude the dads if they want to be included. It shouldn't just be women and children, it should be the whole family to create balance. I'll just go from that. So that was our survey, and from the survey, we really used that to build the case to bring in parenting programs into existing recovery programs. So the rest of my team right now today is at Chrysalis House in Baltimore, the Healthy Steps site, and they're delivering a program called Mom Power. And that is a 10-week attachment-based group that really helps moms develop some skills around self-care that support recovery, but also teaches them the meaning of their children's behavior from an attachment perspective. So one of the things that's hard to do for any parents will always say, well, it doesn't come with a manual to tell you what to do. So it's hard to understand and read your kids' signals and learn what is the meaning of their different behaviors, not just from a developmental point of view, but from a relational point of view. What am I supposed to do or say when my child is doing this or that? And that's really what Mom Power helps moms develop, that ability to see and understand their kids and to respond in kind. One of the mantras in Mom Power is to help parents be strong and in charge and warm and kind. So taking that approach of being the one in charge, because that's what kids need to feel safe and loved and secure, but also being warm and kind, kind of that nurturing side. We also found that the moms, they had a lot of requests about just understanding children's development, and they said that they had programs that would teach like about child safety and certain things about developmental milestones, but nothing really about children's social and emotional development and how the parents' thoughts and feelings were so important to helping their children manage their own thoughts and feelings. So we also added attachment vitamins that Dr. Alicia Lieberman developed, and that really helps parents understand about children's temperament and about the impact of trauma on young kids and what parents can do to help soothe kids' fears and help them feel safe while still holding expectations, so that they can meet their developmental milestones and be successful. We were also the programs invited us in to provide child parent psychotherapy, which is Dr. Lieberman's evidence-based trauma treatment for parents and young children. So we were able to go right into the program and do the therapy there. And then moms also, so those are all kind of more intensive, 10-week, or even the therapy can take even more than 10 weeks. But moms also said they wanted more points of connection to talk about being parents. So we offered parent cafes, which are really these wonderful, more parent-led model where you have different small tabletops and you have questions about parenting, so parents can teach each other, get support, and talk to each other. So parent together and your journey together were kind of similar. And it was also a good way for us to touch base and stay in contact with the programs. And so we're still able to do that to this day. So we were invited into 5 programs. One of them we only did virtually, and I would say that was the hardest one to really keep the engagement. So being allowed to come in really made the biggest difference, because the Mom Power group also has a sunshine time. So when the kids were in childcare, after group, we would go in and sing with the kids and do little story times and help the moms practice some of the things that we had talked about in the group. The last part of the grant was to do this Breakthrough Series collaborative. And you're probably pretty familiar with learning collaboratives and breakthrough collaboratives, but I'll just take a minute to describe the difference as I understand them and as I've learned through my colleagues through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Learning collaboratives are really helpful when you're trying to learn a certain approach or intervention. And it's a way to learn not just the intervention itself, but to try to work with from a team approach to break down the different barriers that get in the way of implementation. How do you bring a program into your center? Getting trained in it is not enough. You know, talking about changes in how you do your intake or how you document something. One change creates a whole chain reaction of other changes that need to be made. And so we've learned that just doing training sometimes isn't enough to create the type of change that to sustain evidence-based programs in a program. A Breakthrough Series collaborative is when you really want to tackle more of an idea. There's a problem that we see, and we really want to use all the teams to be a think tank so that they can think together and more rapidly try to test changes and put them into practice and learn from them together. And so I would say kind of the central thing was how do we integrate mental health, trauma-informed practices, and parenting program into recovery programs that are very centered on a specific way of addressing recovery. The moms themselves know that they have these complex set of needs, and recovery is one, and they all interface with each other, but addressing the trauma and addressing their needs around parenting and taking a family approach is really something that we hope to continue to do. So that was one goal, was to learn from other programs about how to have a community and family-centered approach to bringing resources to families. Things like, do you have a diaper bank in your community that you can bring? Can you foster better relationships between the child welfare folks and the recovery program so that they're not at odds, and instead working together to get resources in place that will support return to the community, connect people with lived experience. So how can people with lived experience and peer support folks be really integrated into programs and learn some of these parenting programs, and like the parent cafe approach? Because that was another thing that mom said, we want to learn from someone who's walked in our shoes and is someone who's more like us. And then to collaborate to identify and address the different unmet needs. So that was really the focus of the group. And so the changes that they decided to work on were anti-stigma and anti-racist language and messages and interactions and campaigns within the 3 programs. A big thing that came up, I think, for everybody throughout the pandemic was to increase self-care and wellness for the whole staff, so that then we could, also have that more available and integrated for participants. And that is really central to a trauma-informed approach. And then how to integrate the parent programs into existing recovery programs. So we got a lot of good feedback from the participants, and they particularly really liked having faculty members with lived experience, both as community members, as we kind of focused on Baltimore area for that Breakthrough Series Collaborative. And they were really experts in talking about the impact of racism in a more personal way. And one of them was a breathologist, so she did a lot of work around breathing. You can see some of the positive remarks there. Let's see. And thinking about love and empathy differently, I've always found many implications in my personal life. So it was a very heartfelt training. We did a lot of community building and really, but also talking about things that were difficult to talk about, like stigma, like racism, and like trauma. So I think creating pathways to talk about sensitive and difficult subjects is really critical. So the summary is the importance of collaboration, both with all of you, what we've learned from this experience in this grant cycle. Also at the community level, that, really lead from where you sit. Everyone has something important and critical to offer to both make and sustain changes that are needed for families. There needs to be more tailoring of interventions based on needs. Carlos was able to do motivational interviewing training for us that was more tailored for parents, and thinking about how to use that strategy when you're working with parents, particularly parents with young children. Comprehensive, that biopsychosocial approach is really what we have to advocate for on all levels. And one of the things that we'd like to push harder, and was a little bit harder to do, is to really get early intervention in there for babies and toddlers and young children. The moms were particularly the stigma related concerns about feeling guilty about whether or not they impacted their drug use, impacted their children in a negative way, makes it really hard for them to reach out, follow through, and accept referrals for intervention. So how we can build that more into the program to really beef up the mom's ability to understand their child's development. And parent programs, I think, are really good resources for that. And then to always use kind of continuous evaluation to see how you're doing. So we're very lucky. We got our state opioid response grant, our SOAR grant for the state, put in parenting programs as a priority. So we're actually able to continue this work. We just started this month. And so our Mom Power group is on its second Friday right now. And we're also going to be able to train other providers to do this with some of that state money, as well as do some work to get students in graduate programs interested in it, and do some kind of priming of the workforce. And lastly, our chairwoman is in the Department of Psychiatry, is very committed to restarting a women's mental health program here. And so we have a good addiction outpatient addiction services here. And so we're going to be bringing the parenting programs into there.
And we can open it up to questions for you guys. You can either put them in the chat or you can take yourself off mute and just ask the question. I've heard some of this data, but every time I hear it, like, I think it's really important. And the moms recognizing that intergenerational connection is a huge thing. I feel like as a practicing therapist, if someone did that after 50 sessions in my office, I felt like we made some progress. So
Yeah.
when I see that happening with your work, like in a shorter time frame, it's a big thing. It's a hard thing to make those connections.
Yeah. And that was not even treatment. That was just the
Yeah.
first, right? Like,
Yeah.
it kind of shows that when we avoid the questions, we're really missing out.
Yeah, for sure. When we're afraid to ask them,
Mhm.
and it all goes into that stigma,
Mhm.
too. So I think that's so important.
Yeah, it took me a while to understand the stigma question
Yeah,
till someone said, well, look, these are all people in treatment. So it's not about motivation, it's about, it has to be integrated into how we think about providing treatment.
yeah. That was so important. I'll kind of get us started on questions because you have so much great data and you have great programming. Like, so Kay and I both are child parent psychotherapy trainers, so we knew each other before the grant. And so obviously, like, that's my bias, my disclaimer, my disclosure, but you have that, and you have attachment vitamins, you have all of these wonderful things. Was there anything in your data that changed the way that you're going to do your practices? Or did it just kind of confirm what you were doing?
I think, we started out of the gate with Mom Power. But I would really like us to at least offer something about attachment vitamins as well. Because it's very specific to trauma, and it's very specific to some of the questions moms had about children's development and their fears. So I think one of the most powerful things I've learned from Alicia Lieberman and these models is that all children, part of normal development is these normative fears that we have very early in life. And the first is the fear of pain, and the next is the fear of loss. And that one I think we talk about a little bit, like about separation anxiety, but the others are the fear of being unloved and the fear of social disapproval. And I think this is really work that we have to go much deeper in, I think at a society level, but certainly the moms, they were very appreciative. They're like, no one's ever talked with us about this, and it made a lot of sense to them. One mom was like, she thought that when we were talking about her kid's separation anxiety, that meant she was being a bad mom. And then finally she was like, oh, are you saying this is normal? Like all kids go through it? Like, yeah, yeah, you got it. So I think definitely walking away with how we give developmental guidance to families. And it's not just about the milestones, it's, so I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially for parents who have been involved with or on the brink of being involved with child welfare so much, like you're evaluating as a parent and you're being evaluated all the time. So I feel like developmental guidance that says, like, this is something that happens with kids this age, that norming has to feel like so good, instead of saying like, you're a bad parent, all of those things that you might have kind of swirling in your own head as a parent.
Yeah.
And then more so if you have someone watching your every move. I think that all the time, like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine having someone watching my parenting day to day, and giving me like a score or whatever.
Exactly.
Would really be anxiety producing. So
Yeah. So kind of at a bigger level, having things like safe baby courts. Hopefully, possibly one of the teams from our Breakthrough Series Collaborative, has a lot of interest in that model for the family drug court, like Jenny has been able to do in Nebraska. Because the moms did have a lot of questions about their legal rights. And so definitely either some kind of medical legal partnership or other, more appropriate models that both focus on child protection, but also parents' rights too. And I know there's a tension between the two sometimes, but I think when you work as an interprofessional team and you really build a good relationship with the parents, some really good outcomes can happen.
yeah, that's one of the things that stuck out for me that you said, like you built some of your programming on the strengths of the moms, like what the moms told you and what you knew that they, their power was. And so I think that I go away with that always in my mind. When I hear that, I feel like that's engaging programming that helps, people are doing their best, and they sometimes know more than we do as professionals. And it just takes us to get out of our heads to notice that a little bit sometimes. So
I guess another thing would be, training more peer support people in the parenting programs. I think that would be really powerful opportunity too.
Yeah. I feel like that attachment vitamins, like I feel like everyone in the world should take attachment vitamins class.
I think so too.
And
we should put up that link so everyone can do it for free. So what we did was a model where it's group therapy. But everyone, let me see if I can get it up real quick. Everyone can take the course for free so that you understand, these principles that we're talking about. And can use it, as developmental guidance. And it's really built for folks, child welfare, child care workers, teachers, mental health folks. So if you're interested in that, it's free. And I think you even get some CEUs.
That's awesome.
But that's a good idea, Jenny. Yeah.
Universal attachment.
Yeah, I think I'll try to work that out as we go forward.
In my experience, it's something that we sometimes skip over, and it doesn't change. Like the research hasn't changed in a very long time, other than, to kind of confirm what we already knew. And that's not true about many things.
That's true.
I was going back and looking at, unfortunately, when I was at the university, they YouTubed all of our trainings. So I had the shock and horror watching myself.
Oh my God.
This will be like really outdated because it was 8 years ago, but most of the talk that I gave was on attachment. And I was like, it's not outdated.
No.
So, but yeah, that's a great resource. And Cody, we can maybe include that when we send out the recording, that link, so that as a resource, because that would be great. And I think
that's an easy takeaway that everyone can.
Yeah. And there's, grantees could use that too. I think,
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions? A lot of data to like incorporate it, but really interesting.
Yeah, we did get to do a poster presentation at the World Association of Infant Mental Health, so I put that in the
Yeah.
chat, and that can go out to, and try to, every time I try to put things in the chat, it kind of freezes up on me. So, but I think Jenny has both and they can go out too.
Yeah, yeah. And if you think of anything else that you think we need, let us know and we'll put it in there. But I appreciate your time. It was so fun to circle around and get to be your coach.
Yeah, it was great.
So
Jenny even presented in our Breakthrough Series collaborative.
yeah, and that was a really neat process. Like we could spend a whole nother office hours talking about that process. Probably
Yeah.
it was a great process. I was only there for part of it, but
Yeah.
it was really
I think that would apply to a lot of people's grants, especially because
Yeah.
this is such a deeply like community driven, grantees. So I'm a big believer in that Breakthrough Series collaborative. So
Yeah, that was a great process. So all right. Well, thanks, Kay. We'll give people like 10 minutes to run and get coffee in between. In the spirit of self-care that you decided that everybody needed. Everybody should take this 10 minutes to like sniff outside air or like do something to take care of yourself before your next meeting. So, and Cody, do you have anything that we need to wrap up?
Yeah. So I just sent a bunch of links in the chat. So the Google Drive links are links from the OVC TTA Google Drive of several PDFs that Kay and team shared with us. And then the survey link is labeled survey link, and we'd really appreciate it if you filled that out. It'll help us with our future development efforts. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to complete. But yes, thank you so much for joining us in this amazing office hour, and stay tuned for future office hour announcements. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
happy summer, everyone. Bye-bye.